Well, at this hour, the Republicans in the House of Representatives are desperately trying to figure out how to pass a bill that Donald Trump urged them to vote for today, apparently not realizing that if Republicans do pass this bill, they will lose the House of Representatives in the next election, and that would once again expose Donald Trump to the possibility of being impeached by the House of Representatives when it is controlled by the Democrats. Donald Trump will have 2 years of impeachment exposure there, with Hakeem Jeffries as the possible next Speaker of the House of Representatives, if the Republicans managed to do what they're trying to do tonight. That will be partly the result. Donald Trump plays politics the way he does everything else. Immediate gratification, no long-term planning. That is apparently how Donald Trump ended up alone in a hotel room with porn star Stormy Daniels, which eventually led to him being convicted of 34 felonies in the aftermath of that particular pursuit of instant gratification with no long-term planning. Most presidents actually throughout our history have never made a trip up to Congress to try to push a bill in trouble over the legislative finish line. Most presidents never did that in their entire presidency. It is not a sign of strength that Donald Trump had to go to the House of Representatives today and beg them in person to pass a giant tax cut bill that is filled with all sorts of other things that Donald Trump doesn't understand, that violate Trump campaign promises like cuts to Medicaid and ending a provision of the Affordable Care Act that will rip health care coverage away. Between the Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, a total of 13 million people, according to the expert projections of the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. And as of now, right now, Republicans do not have the votes to pass that bill in the House of Representatives. But Politico is reporting tonight, Speaker Johnson's leadership circle believes they can lean on the final holdouts until they break, possibly with help from Trump. Well, that has worked almost every time for Donald Trump. It didn't work in 2017 when Senator John McCain, who knew he was dying then, suffering from a fatal cancer, cast the decisive vote at 1:29 a.m. to defeat Donald Trump's final attempt to repeal Obamacare. It's always in the middle of the night because the congressional leadership, trying to pass a difficult bill by one vote, is always trying to rush it, because the longer you let members think about it, maybe sleep on it, a difficult vote, the less likely you are to get that difficult vote from those members. And in the end, leadership uses the physical fatigue of the middle of the night session as another way of crushing the strength of the holdouts. And so, in the middle of the night tonight, the weak Republican Speaker of the House will try to get a vote through the Rules Committee beginning at 1 a.m. The Rules Committee is the last stop for any bill being voted on by the House of Representatives before it goes to the House floor. If the bill makes it through the Rules Committee, it could still fail on the House floor. But in the past, the right-wing Republican holdouts, who always claim they won't vote for Trump bills that wildly increase the national debt, and they won't vote for a multi-trillion-dollar increase in the debt ceiling, those guys, they always cave. Every time they cave. They're really reliable. They are never telling the truth when they say they won't vote for a Trump bill. Chip Roy of Texas, every time does the same grandstand performances, holds out for a few days about how outrageous it is that we have not brought the budget deficit to zero and eliminated the national debt, and how dare we raise the debt ceiling again. Chip Roy has voted to increase the national debt by greater amounts than the national debt increased during the entire Senate career of Joe Biden. That's how much Republicans, through massive tax cuts and overspending, especially overspending on defense, have increased the national debt. Donald Trump has, knowingly or unknowingly, it's always impossible to tell with him, agreed to violate his campaign pledge to not cut Medicaid. In this massive budget bill, there are the biggest cuts to Medicaid in the history of the program, cuts that will throw 8 million people out of the Medicaid system and leave them without health insurance of any kind and no chance of getting it. Donald Trump promised he would never do that. Today, he told the gathered news media at the Capitol that the lie that he's not in favor of cutting Medicaid. He just wants to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid. Donald Trump was unable to identify a single item of waste or fraud or abuse in the Medicaid system, and no reporter who asked him a question even tried to press him on that point of what waste, fraud, and abuse is, because the Washington news media plays by completely different rules with Donald Trump. And the number one rule is, generally speaking, and this doesn't apply to every one of them, but it overwhelmingly applies to the group, the number one determining factor in the way they treat Donald Trump is overwhelming fear. That is what allows Donald Trump to simply talk over the reporters without ever being interrupted by a reporter. They never scream at Donald Trump the way they screamed at Joe Biden because, among other things, they are very much afraid of Donald Trump, just like Republican members of Congress. And so the right-wingers who claim to be the so-called budget hawks, the Republicans who claim that they care about the national debt more than anything else, those Republicans will, as they always have, go along with Donald Trump and be willing to vote another huge increase in the national debt. And this time, the bill is going to pass or be defeated with the votes of New York Republicans and California Republicans in the House, who will have to betray their constituents and the promises that they made to their constituents in their last congressional campaign in order to vote for this bill. Donald Trump is not the only Republican who is violating his campaign pledges by supporting this bill. You will hear the word SALT thrown around about this legislation. It is one of those completely indefensible and unnecessary shorthands that the political community uses, in this case, for state and local taxes. See, that's how easy it is to say. State and local taxes. For the lifetimes of everyone listening to my voice now on television or Sirius radio, state income taxes and property taxes have always been fully deductible on your federal income tax return. And that's how some people are able to afford their homes, because they can deduct the property taxes on their homes from their tax returns. That's the key that enables them to afford their homes. And it took Republicans in the Trump presidency and Donald Trump to decide to virtually eliminate that deductibility. They limited that deductibility, which used to be unlimited. They limited it at $10,000, which is less than the property tax bill of many middle-class taxpayers on Long Island and in California and in Pennsylvania. And in typical Trumpian fashion, having inflicted this pain on those taxpayers, which dramatically increased the tax burden on those taxpayers, the overall tax burden. When Donald Trump campaigned for the presidency last year, he said he was going to eliminate the tax pain that he inflicted on them. Donald Trump's tax cut during his first presidency was the first tax cut in history that actually raised taxes on some taxpayers, and it did it by eliminating the deductibility of state and local taxes on a federal tax return. Many, many, many people around the country saw their overall tax burden increase. Their whole tax burden increased significantly after Donald Trump's so-called tax cut, which was not a tax cut for them. It was a tax increase. And it wasn't a tax cut for people around the country who ended up paying more in taxes because of the elimination of the deductibility of state and local taxes. And so when Donald Trump was campaigning last year, he knew this was a problem. And so he promised those taxpayers whose taxes he had raised that he would fix it. The guy who caused the problem came to the voters of Long Island and said to them, and elsewhere in the country, Pennsylvania, said to those voters, in effect, vote for me and I'll fix the problem that I caused you. He forgot to mention at the time that he caused the problem. Here he is on Long Island last September making that promise.
I will cut taxes for families, small businesses, and workers, including restoring the SALT deduction, saving thousands of dollars for residents of New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and other high-cost states.
That audience knew what SALT meant. Did you hear that cheer go up? That audience on Long Island knew exactly what he was talking about when he said the SALT deduction, because their tax burden went up because Donald Trump made state and local taxes no longer fully deductible. To say that he was going to restore the SALT deduction, meaning the SALT deduction was going to be what it was before Donald Trump. And that means unlimited, just like the charitable deduction, almost every other deduction in the tax code. And now Donald Trump is supporting a bill that will not restore the deductibility of all state and local taxes. The bill will move the cap on that deduction from $10,000 to $40,000 as of this hour tonight. And that is not what Republican members of the House of Representatives from New York promised their constituents. They promised to get them back to the good old times in taxation under President Obama, when they could fully deduct their state and local taxes. The senior senator from New York alerted New York voters today about what Donald Trump and New York Republican members of the House of Representatives are doing to them once again.
When Trump came to Long Island and talked a big game about restoring SALT relief, I called it a farce. It was actually a lie. And today he has proved himself a liar and has seemingly played New York Republicans for fools.
And now the New York Republicans like Mike Lawler and Elise Stefanik have their choice tonight at this very hour. Vote like fools and lose their re-elections to the House of Representatives next year, or defy Donald Trump. If the bill passes, it will be reported as a Trump win. If the bill passes, those House Republicans in New York, in Pennsylvania, in California will go from currently being the most vulnerable Republicans in next year's elections campaign to Republicans who do not stand a chance in next year's congressional campaign. And so, in the politics of governing, the news media constantly makes the mistake of declaring a winner in the first inning of a 9-inning game. If the Republicans pass this bill in the House of Representatives, they will lose those seats in New York. They will lose the House of Representatives. And if they don't pass this bill, then the Republican House of Representatives becomes the Republican House of Chaos. And they will also lose the election for the House of Representatives next year after 2 years of being the Republican House of Chaos. And so no matter what the outcome, the House Republicans, with Donald Trump's complete lack of comprehension, have constructed for themselves a legislative suicide pact that only the most incompetent haters of government could construct, and only the kinds of politicians who absolutely don't mean anything they say could construct and vote for. Chip Roy and the so-called hardcore budget hawks have never meant what they say, and they've proved that over and over again. They have always voted when their votes were needed to increase the national debt. And now, in Long Island and in Pennsylvania and in California, Republicans are going to find out if their House members lied to them about their tax burden. It is not a sign of strength that the final key legislative committee process to move this bill is scheduled to occur at 1 a.m. in the middle of the night. They don't want you to know. They don't want you to watch. They do not want you to know what they are doing. They do not want their constituents to know. They don't want their constituents to see what they are doing. because they know what a betrayal it is to their own campaign promises, including Donald Trump's campaign promises. The Democratic leader of the House, Hakeem Jeffries, who, with this bill, is now well on his way to being the next Speaker of the House after the next congressional election, said tonight, "It is deeply troubling that you would attempt to jam this legislation down the throats of the American people. What else are you hiding?"